Hi, I'm Karyn Pugliese and I'm sitting in for Sierra Bettens. Welcome to InFocus. On this episode, a celebration. APTN just turned 25 years old this year. From humble beginnings, a country-wide network of reporters who won just about every journalism award in Canada. We've been in your communities and in your homes, both in person and electronically. So what's an anniversary without a party, right? That's what we're doing today. And here are some guests, some of them who have been here since the lights came on. In Ottawa, I've got Dan David, the father of APTN News and a news elder to many of us who passed through APTN over the years. It all started back with him in 2000. Todd Lamirande was one of the original reporters, I should say VJ, on the ground for APTN News. He got a start in British Columbia, and many of you watched him as a host for about a decade on News and Investigates. He's now the executive director here in Eastern Canada. And in Winnipeg, we're joined by Bruce Spence. He's also been here since the start. He was the first senior producer of News, and Charmaine Straker started out working in our studio crew. She's now the show producer in Winnipeg and responsible for getting you your daily news 6 days a week. I don't know how she sleeps, but she always looks good. Hey guys, welcome.
Hey.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome.
I'm so happy that we're able to do this and celebrate 25 years on the air. And I just want to start actually, Bruce and Dan, maybe with you, Dan. Tell us about how APTN News started.
In chaos, in complete chaos. Nothing worked, and they were predicting a 90% meltdown of everything. And somehow we pulled it all together.
Well, I remember this because I remember coming into the bureau. The first show had actually gone to air, and I have no idea how that even happened because I came in and there was like this editing machine with all these wires hanging out of it. It looked like some animal with its throat torn out.
It probably was.
Literally was in pieces on the ground. And I was told we had to mail tapes into Winnipeg because we didn't have any way to get stuff that we taped here to there.
Well, that was one of the big problems. You know, when I came in and I came back from South Africa, I got hired in this job, and they hired me because I had an idea on how to solve that problem. How do you get tape from Halifax or Vancouver or Toronto and get it to a central newsroom? And it was really looking for somebody that we could piggyback with. And so we had to piggyback with an established network, and that was CTV. We were lucky. We were really lucky that we were able to get that partnership going right off the bat. Otherwise, we would have been literally, putting news tapes onto airplanes or trains or whatever.
That's what I had to do when I first started in Vancouver.
You did?
Yes. So my deadline wasn't the news deadline. My deadline was the FedEx deadline.
Wow.
So I'd quickly write up a paper script. And I was working at my aunt's a house when I first moved to Vancouver. And once I got a paper edit ready, I got the tapes. We used SP tapes, or at least I did back in the day.
Yeah.
Put them in a FedEx box, jumped in the car, and rushed down to make the FedEx deadline because it was around 3:15 Pacific time. I remember this, 3:50 Pacific. I had to make that deadline. So you get the tapes sent back to Winnipeg, and they assembled the story there. So there was no way to do daily news back in those days.
Yeah,
it was just impossible.
I remember this too because you had to do your script on paper. So you'd look through the camera, and you would get the time codes through the camera and write down the time codes and give the directions to the editor. And we had an option though, because we had a CTV building close to us, but sometimes Bruce used to tell us, let's save the company a few bucks and mail it in. So we had to go down to the end of the Spark Street Mall where there was a post office and we had some deadline. How are things even happening in Winnipeg, Bruce?
Well, that's because we were the world headquarters of APTN National News. We had a lot of help. We had a pretty tight studio crew that was able to grab this stuff and put it all together. And the rest of us, like the reporters and VJs, spent some time in this boot camp that Dan had put together. And, we had to rush through, climb over hurdles, and we had to go on our bellies under barbed wire while him and Tim Knight, the late Tim Knight, God rest his soul, would fire live ammunition at us. In the form of journalistic principles and writing and producing and
I'm going to just interrupt you there, Bruce. I'm just going to explain who Tim Knight was. Tim Knight was a person who had worked throughout the industry, training journalists, not only in Canada, but around the world. And Dan was lucky enough to bring him in to work with the first crew. So that's what you're describing there. I just thought people might not know who Tim Knight is. Please go ahead.
Yeah, before we went to air, and before we were mailing tapes around, and what do they call that? The Pony Express and the Moccasin Telegraph. We had to figure out how to put a show together first. So I had very little TV experience. Some of the others had a lot of writing experience, and I think the only reason I ended up here was Dan pulled my resume out of a pile of resumes and vaguely remembered my name from somewhere. And so here I am.
What were you doing before you came to APTN? What was your last job just before you came?
Goodness.
He worked with me.
What?
We worked together. Remember, Bruce?
Yeah, I was literally in the same newsroom as Todd, working.
Which was?
Yeah, no, it
For Tega.
Tega Communications,
Tega Communications,
the Drum and the First Perspective, which were newspapers. They were monthly at the time.
Trevor Grey Eyes, wasn't it?
Yeah, Trevor was there, very in and out. There was quite a few people there, including Colleen, who I ended up marrying, and we're still good friends, by the way. But I was there, and Dan came and saw me. Dan and Tim, and a month later, I was upstairs in the old building with 10 or 12 other people. The only one of that group that's left now is Ken Welsh, who is our first technical director.
That's right, yeah.
It was so hard to even get a stable job in news as an Indigenous person. Like it's not like now, because now there's a lot of newsrooms that want to snap you up. It's not always easy to keep the jobs in the newsroom, because sometimes you kind of struggle just trying to get your stories out. But I remember, just a bunch of us sitting around doing other things, and Dan kind of finding us in all these corners and bringing us in.
That was the great part, just finding a whole bunch of people who had sometimes never worked in television before and training them and then throwing them into the deep end of the pool and seeing what happens. And sometimes magic, most of the time, not so much, but it was great.
I remember that well, because I was hired, and I remember you calling me out of the blue. I worked at the Manitoba Métis Federation at that time. You offered me a job. I was headhunted, and I turned you down.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to work in television. So I consulted with Bruce, because he'd been there a few months, and the second time around you called, and I accepted the offer, and I came over to APTN News. And I was there as a writer-researcher, though really hadn't defined what that was, because within that first week, I was told to go do a television story. I didn't want to work in television, but here I am being sent out to do a television story. I'll never forget it. It's about these two guys who stood in a ditch just waving at passing cars.
Oh, yeah.
I remember that story.
Bruce, I can't remember the first station, Brokenhead?
It was Brokenhead, yeah.
It was Brokenhead,
Yeah.
and that's what they did. They were developmentally challenged, and all day, that's all they did was wave at the cars. And if you drive through Brokenhead now, they're long gone. They passed away, both these brothers. There's a gas station there called Wavers.
Oh, really?
And it's named after these two guys.
No
Cool.
way. Oh, that's so sweet. And I would be one of those great stories, because probably everybody traveling on the train saw these guys coming out and didn't know who they were, and you gave them their moment of fame.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
It was on a popular route to one of the beaches on Lake
It's
Winnipeg.
Yeah.
So it was a very popular route, and everybody knew these two guys.
Well, I want to bring Charmaine into the conversation, our studio person. Now, I know, Charmaine, I think by the time you came on, we'd settled some of the problems about mailing tapes and getting
hope.
studio together. Tell us about your arrival at APTN.
Well, I think I was actually one of the rare people who came in with TV experience. I had spent 5 years at Global Television and a very short stint at CBC when I first got here. I actually came in as somebody who was casual, and I was actually coming to backfill because APTN was getting ready to co-host the 2010 Olympics. So I was one of the few people who actually were not part of the Olympic crew who were helping keep the news to air every single day, actually. So I remember that long month of working long mornings and putting the news together at 7:30, or I think it was in the morning, and then the rest of the crew left for the rest of the day, worked on the other side, and worked putting together the Olympic show, and I was staying on the other side grabbing all the elements for news. So I know when I came in, it was definitely, there was nothing being mailed in, thankfully, but there was a lot of a new process for me because this was brand new for me, working with the national newscast and instead of covering local news, which I was doing before. But it's definitely come a long way since too. Like, we've upgraded our systems. We are much more streamlined, much more digital, and it's been such an adventure coming through the ranks of everything.
It's funny you should say, that you're going back and beefing up the digital side, because we were the very first all digital operation in Canada. We had to be backwards compatible back to SP and Betamax and those formats. Mm-hmm. But really, we were the very first all digital plant in Canada. Kind of proud of that.
I've heard
Yeah,
that.
it's been a long time. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's got to be close to 15 years since we've been fully digital.
I think so.
And you're right. It was a huge operation to do the switch. I remember that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What a lot of work that was.
So, you were talking about like one of the stories that you remember, Todd. I kind of wanted to do a little bit of a roundtable and just ask people. Maybe I'll start with Bruce, actually. What was one of the stories that you've either done or that you have seen on APTN that stayed with you?
Well, I think our coverage of the lobster wars, I call them, on the East Coast there at Sipanikidik and Elsipogtog and Escanopatij, they were crazy stories, and we had an impact there. Maureen Gugu was with us, as well as Ken Williams. And
you also got down on the ground there, Bruce.
Oh yeah, we were in danger of being kidnapped by a rogue fishing boat captain, and the warriors were like, he was chasing a Coast Guard cutter and with his little fishing boat, but there were some ex-military guys, warrior types from out west here, and they were getting ready to mutiny, but he turns around at the last minute and comes back to safer waters. That was a seminal moment. The other one too was DFO and the RCMP held a press conference in town, and all the media went there except Ken Williams and I, and we were in contact with Maureen, who was at the press conference, and all of a sudden about 10 of those DFO Zodiacs came roaring in, and they were starting to cut up the traps, and we got it on tape, and we filed that stuff later that day using, of course, the CTV satellite truck. So that was a good one. And the other one was that Dan set this one up, was the Summit of the Americas in Quebec City, which was a full-scale riot for like 3 or 4 days going, and I don't think anybody was killed, but there was a lot of fighting with the RC. Well, they brought police in from all over Canada to deal with these 10,000 people crowds, and there was a lot of tear gas going around, and there was Maureen again, and she had
asthma.
Exactly. So she was. But she was still there slugging away, getting her stories out.
Well, you know how Maureen was. She loved the fact that she got tear gassed. Like she's that kind of run towards the fire kind of reporter. Yeah.
So those are two. And there was one story that I did myself. Basically, was a fellow who is still chief at Fort William First Nation. Somebody in his staff was basically taking money out of the social assistance funds, and there was a whistleblower that provided us with a bunch of documents and proof, basically, that this was really happening. So we, under the tutelage of Rita Deverell, who was our news director in the days following Dan, she had the good sense to send us down there. So that myself and Daryl Richard, who is still doing switching right now, we went there. We pulled that story out, and it was a good story. And the person was actually jailed for her efforts. The chief lost the next election, but in subsequent years he was voted back in, and I believe he's still there now. So those are some stories that come to mind, but there were so many.
Yeah, you know, Bruce. I'm actually just going to go to Dan for a second because you just really made me think of something, and we all had to do this at some point. I think in 2000, people were happy to have us APTN Indigenous reporters, First Nations reporters, a Mi'kmaq reporter that they knew there in the community reporting when all this like non-native media was coming and descending. And I'll come back to that idea in a minute. But the other thing that you said is that we did accountability stories. And as I recall, one of the very first stories I did, it was an accountability story. And I was basically just saying, it was one of those stories that we see all the time, where a natural resource is going to get exploited, the community gets split, and they get divided into at least two groups. Yeah. And the chief and council that were moving ahead would not talk to me, but I went ahead and talked to the people who were protesting and blocking logging trucks. And after filing that story, the chief wrote in and said, "Fire that girl. How dare she come into my community without my permission and talk to my people?" I don't know if you remember that, Dan.
Oh, no.
I didn't know. I didn't know what
There were so many things like that.
I literally did not know, because that was like, I mean, I think I'd just been here for 4 weeks and I didn't know, is this going to be a real newsroom? Am I allowed to do those kind of stories? And what you said, you don't remember, so I'll remind you because it stayed with me, was you said, "I think we're going to get this a lot." And I wouldn't ask the mayor's permission to speak to people in Ottawa, so I'm not going to ask the chief's permission when people in that community tell me there's a story of public interest. So you encouraged us to hold our own people accountable.
Well, I remember I got a call from Bruce. Bruce calls up. I'm upstairs on the 3rd floor. He's in the newsroom down on the ground floor, and he says, "Dan, you got to come down here right now." So I have no idea. I go down there, and I arrive at, and there's this guy, one of Phil Fontaine's henchmen, one of his guys who's also on the board of APTN. And he's in there and he's telling people, "I want you to do this story. I want you to do that story." And he's telling people, that he's trying to instruct the reporters. Mm. And I grabbed him by the arm and I took him outside and I said, "Don't you ever come into the newsroom unless you're with the other board members, part of an official tour. Our job was to protect you guys, give you the resources, the money, the time that you needed to be able to produce stories, and to protect you, to protect the integrity of the news, because we needed it. All of us, all Indigenous peoples had to have independent journalism.
Yeah, it continues to be, I think, an issue. A lot of people who try to start up news on a reserve or in a community, sometimes they're financially dependent on the band in order to fund the work that they're doing. And so they feel restricted, or they're dependent on businesses on the reserve. And so there's some things that they feel more or less comfortable covering. But we had a unique, business arrangement where we didn't get government funding.
We were finally independent.
We got money through cable subscriber fees and commercials.
Yeah.
And so we had that grace. Charmaine, I want to ask you, and now you're doing editorial, you're show producer. What story has impacted you or stayed with you over the years?
I was thinking about that when you first asked Bruce, and just because I worked from the studio crew technical side, working as associate director, and I actually got a chance to go back to my home reserve, which is Barons River First Nation in Manitoba, and I got to go up with a reporter, and we were doing a story about somebody had passed away there, and the name is escaping me right now, but they had fundraised to bring her headstone back to the community. And I was really surprised they asked me to go as a camera person. And it was really impactful just because going back to where my family is from and seeing how much it meant to all the community members for this to be coming back, and just seeing how everyone was excited that, okay, this is finally happening. Now we can have this person laid to rest properly. So that was one thing that's really always kind of stuck out with me, and being able to actually go out with the reporter. I believe it was Natanis Pipop when she was here with us many years ago. And just getting reaction from the community and everyone else, and being with the person's friends about how important it was to be able to bring back and put her name to the whole situation. And another one, like I've been behind the scenes a lot for many stories coming in, and to see a live feed of what was going on in Standing Rock, just seeing everything that was happening there was a big one. Seeing Dennis Ward's coverage and everything that was happening there being fed back. And then also another one that really stuck out to me was receiving the news about the unmarked graves being discovered. So like I've seen a lot being fed and come throughout the time. So it's just been being that on that side, and now being on the editorial side, which has been a very big shift, but it's been definitely very rewarding at the same time to be able to work with reporters to bring these stories to air every day. So I'm sure there's so many more I could add to the list, but right now those are the main ones that kind of stuck out for me.
Yeah, I remember, Dennis too, being out there, I think with Jared, I think was the shooter at Standing Rock. No, that
Damien.
was the Dakota. Oh, it was Damien.
Yes,
there we
Damien.
go. Dakota Access Pipeline, right, that they were building at the time, and big protests against it. But I was actually watching what was happening because a lot of people were Facebook Living it, which was something that wasn't there in the beginning for sure. No. And I remember seeing this one scene where they were running by, and I think the cops were like using pepper spray or something. And I was like, oh my God, I think I just saw Dennis and his cameraman get pepper sprayed.
Oh yeah, they got pepper
and
sprayed.
They did.
And there was rubber bullets flying by too, just like seeing everything that was happening. Like I know there was a few people who went down as well, but just to see what they went through, what they experienced. And Dennis and I were just talking about this not long ago, and it's the 10-year anniversary is coming up soon too. So it's something that has flown by since then. I can't believe it's been 10 years. And just to see everything that they experienced on their end.
Well, it's your job now to assign people, Charmaine. And I know right now we've got wildfires going on. I know there's been some big emotional stories about missing and murdered Indigenous women in Winnipeg. And so now that you're in the role of assigning reporters, you've got some responsibility for their mental health and their physical health and safety as well. What do you think about when you send people out on these assignments?
I'm definitely very aware of that. I do try to break everything up depending on who the reporter is. I know it's a little bit harder when we only have one person covering an entire province. So I do try to break them up with a little lighthearted stories. So if someone's covering something a little bit heavier, I'm like, okay, let's try breaking this up and let's get to that story you've been working on for a while and you've kind of put off just because it's not as time sensitive as a wildfire MMIWG. So I do work with them. I like to contact the reporters and just check in and see how they're doing. So that's a really big thing for me, is just to be able to check in and make sure everyone's handling everything okay, and that we're making sure we get all the broad spectrum of all the reports and out there. So just, yeah, it's definitely been a very big challenge, but I do hope that I am able to help them out in that sense too, because I know when last year when T.R. Wheatley was covering for the trial of Jeremy Sabitsky, that was a lot for her, because she was going every single day. Basically, as soon as everything was done, I'm like, you're going on vacation. You're not going to think about news. You're going to go enjoy yourself. And that's what she did. So that's definitely in my thoughts every single day whenever trying to cover stories, and especially in those magnitudes that hit home for a lot of people, because you just never know what's going to happen. So yeah, it's always something I'm definitely thinking about for people.
And I see Todd and Dan kind of nodding along. You've both had to assign people. You're assigning people right now. You assigned me. Oh.
Yeah. But I'm trying to think of a story that affected me, and there's been so many over the years. Mm-hmm. And I remember Picton. I just lived 10 minutes away.
Oh.
And that was a media circus. I'd never seen a media circus in my life until that. And then I'm thinking
Picton, of course, being the
Robert
serial
Picton.
Yeah, Robert Picton, the serial killer. Yeah.
And I'm thinking even further back, and Dan knows this story well, is when I was at Sun Peaks covering the Native Youth Movement. And I'm not going to go into too much details I used to when I was younger, but the point I want to make about that is
Todd got arrested.
Yes, I wasn't arrested, but they pulled me into the backseat of the car. And
the police did.
The police did, to try and get the tapes, because they saw me. There was altercation, saw me filming it. And it's so funny because the Native Youth Movement, the people who were part of that, saw me pulled over and drove past, and I was the one who was pulled over. And they needed a court order to get the tapes. But what I saw after that was how the Canadian state criminalized these young people. And made it so that they couldn't protest the land that they felt was being colonized through the expansion of Sun Peaks. And in a way, it's really bittersweet. There was kudos to them for doing that at such a young age. Of course, Manuel's sisters had a good mentor in their dad, Chief Manuel. But they got their way in a way. They got criminalized. They couldn't come near anywhere. I know one of them spent some time in jail. Mm-hmm. And the Sun Peaks expansion went through anyways. And it's kind of disappointing in a way.
Yeah, there's a flare happening there again.
There was no free prior informed consent back then. But we've got free prior informed consent now, and it feels like the same thing's happening, but on an even larger scale. Yeah. With this throne speech from the king, research projects should be approved in 2 years instead of 5. We got here in Ontario Bill 5 that's going to create these special economic zones where environmental assessments, for example, will be far less, so that they can push through a development of the Ring of Fire. And it's deja vu. And I guess at the end of the day, after 25 years here, I see the same things repeated over and over again. Yeah. And it feels like nothing changes. And it's so frustrating as a journalist and now as an executive producer who's been here for 25 years, that nothing changes. The first time I stepped onto reserve, what was it for? It was for a suicide crisis. What's happened since then? And it's frustrating. Why can't we get some sort of change so that people's lives are better? It feels sometimes, yes, we do stories, they're popular for a little while, but over the long term, how do we make people's lives better?
I do feel like the same thing sometimes. Like I've been in and out of APTN. I've been here, I've left, I've been here, I've left, and now I'm back. And I do see that same thing with like the stories repeating themselves. But I do feel like one of the things that changed is our people have changed. And I think we saw a lot of that in Idle No More, and with the resource conflicts coming up. I don't know. I feel like the chiefs are really pushing. They're not going to be treated like a special interest group. They're insisting of being treated like nations. We're going to have to wrap up, but I just want to come back to you, Dan. And I really want to end with you and ask you, after starting APTN, and you had a vision for what news could be, and I don't think it's kept quite the shape of what your original vision is, but what do you think of us now?
Well, before APTN, when I was working in the mainstream media, I could probably count the number of Indigenous peoples working in the mainstream on the fingers of one hand, and I could name them, actually, all of them. APTN was like this door opening. All of a sudden, a world of possibilities opened for anybody who wanted to be an Indigenous journalist, and it allowed people to come in to get trained a little bit for their resume and to go on to someplace else. It's changed the industry. It's changed Canadian journalism, and in the best way possible, by bringing out those stories that were disallowed. They were forbidden. You weren't allowed to voice these stories for such a long time, and now they are. Now they're front and center every night on the news, and that's the best thing that I can think of.
Well, one of the things that I think of is that when I've moved those times away from APTN is how much APTN has created the space for me to be me elsewhere in the industry, because that certainly didn't exist before.
No.
And I guess with that, we're going to wrap up our 25th anniversary special. I just want to thank you guys all for being here.
Happy birthday. Thank you.
It's been a slice.
And Dan, thanks for starting it all. Dan David, Todd Lamirande, Charmaine Straker, Bruce Spence, thank you. And thank you everybody out there for joining us, and for joining us for 25 years. This episode of In Focus was produced by Mark Blackburn and Charmaine Straker, with editing by Jesse Andrushko, and hosted by me, Karyn Pugliese. If you're enjoying the show, let us know by leaving a rating and a review. And please do that, it helps people find us. And you can find more APTN podcasts like APTN News Brief and Truth in Politics on aptnnews.ca/podcasts or on your favorite player. If you want to comment on anything you've heard on the show, drop us a line at infocus@aptnnews.ca. We do love to hear from you. And APTN is a not-for-profit news agency. So if you'd like to contribute to its operations and allow our reporters to continue to tell stories, please go to aptnnews.ca and hit the contribution button. Thank you for listening.
I'm Kathleen Martins, a reporter with APTN News. Homeless, houseless, shelterless people aren't hard to find in Winnipeg, a city of about 1 million in the middle of the prairies. They're on sidewalks, in bus shelters, and down alleyways. They're living in tents and squatting in empty buildings. They're even sleeping in abandoned cars. But who are they?
This building here it's pretty awesome, because a lot of the relatives know that if they ever need anything, they can come there and get clothes or food or...
I like that you call them relatives.
Well, we're all related in a sense, right?
Downtown Safety Patrol Manager Vinnie Lilly is referring to the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people who make up more than half of the city's homeless population. They come from rural and remote communities. Find out why and hear their stories in a new 5-part APTN News podcast with me called Our Relatives.